The new theater of the mind. The Bruce Collins Show.
Welcome back to the Bruce Collins Show. We're very glad to have you join us. One of the most interesting and entertaining talk show hosts out there joins us tonight, Micah Hanks. And he's going to talk to us about these sounds that people keep reporting. Mystery booms. What are they? Micah Hanks joins us tonight. The Bruce Collins Show airs every Friday night at midnight right here at WWPR 1490 AM. You can listen to past archives of the Bruce Collins Show at ipbn-fm.com. That's ipbn-fm.com. There's a banner just for the Bruce Collins Show on the Intrepid Paradigm Broadcasting Network website. Click on the show banner and you will go right to our page. We would appreciate it if you're able to spread the word for our show by word of mouth, social media, or in whatever creative way you can. Also, we have a Facebook page for the Bruce Collins Show. Please like us there. And you can email the show at bruce_collins_show@aol.com. The Bruce Collins Show also has a YouTube channel. Visit YouTube, search for the Bruce Collins Show channel, subscribe, and catch all the latest shows on YouTube. And now, Micah Hanks, what are mystery booms? Joining us in a moment. Radio hosts across the United States and around the world use standard auditory transfer devices to bring their message to you. However, my next guest's name is so synonymous with radio that he has his own newly patented microphone. Yes, that's right. I'm speaking of the mouth of the South, Micah Hanks. Now, for the few of you who have never heard of Micah Hanks is a writer, researcher, podcaster, lecturer, and radio personality whose work addresses a variety of areas, including history, politics, scientific theories, and unexplained phenomena. That's what my parents said about my birth. Open-minded but skeptical in his approach, his research has examined a broad variety of subjects over the years, incorporating interest in scientific anomalies, cultural studies, psychology, sci-fi, and pop culture. Also government secrecy and the prospects of our technological future as a species as influenced by science. You know, fluff work. No, just kidding. He's the author of several books, including his most recent work, The Ghost Rockets, as well as his 2011 release, Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule, The Search for Sentient Intelligence from Other Worlds, in 2012. And also his book, The UFO Singularity, which I think was what was published in 2012, hence I was giving the date, explored themes that incorporated futurism and technology, and at times skeptically into an analysis of UFO phenomenon. Hanks has served as a consulting editor and columnist for Fate magazine, and he is a staff blogger for Mysterious Universe. He has written for a variety of print publications, including New Dawn, and has appeared on TV and radio programs that include Coast to Coast AM and Beyond Belief with George Norrie, Whitley Strieber's Dreamland, National Geographic's Paranatural, History Channel's Guts and Bolts, CNN Radio, the Jeff Renz program, and many others. His weekly Gralian Report podcast is available at GralianReport.com. Again, that's GralianReport.com. In addition to a news and current events podcast, The Middle Theory, available at MiddleTheory.com. Additional details about Micah and his work can be found at MicahHanks.com, including information about his music, books, and writing projects. Hanks lives in the heart of Appalachia near Asheville, North Carolina. Please welcome Micah, I'm not Tom's son, Hanks, to the Bruce Collins Show. Hey, Micah, welcome back.
That's a great intro. They get better every time I'm on with you, though. They really do.
I try. Now, are you using your microphone tonight?
Yes, this is the patented Micah phone, for a simple, easy, one-time installment of $4,972. Anyone can own one of these, and you can buy those at a separate site I have set up, which is called SasquatchHucksterFest2015.com. No, I'm kidding.
all other microphones, or all other phones, are only micro compared to the Micah phone.
Yeah. Sadly, this microphone is so one of a kind, I don't think it'll ever be available for public consumption or mass-produced for that matter. But, all kidding aside, Bruce, I do get a lot of questions about the microphone I use. And if you've ever seen one of these mics, it's the MXL V900, which a lot of, the podcasters and radio broadcasters, they swear by the Heil PR40. Love that mic, by the way. Excellent microphone.
Great.
The RE20 by Electro Voice is really good. But this mic, it's a close pattern, but nonetheless a condenser microphone. And if you imagine the old Orson Welles style, large diaphragm condenser that you'd see in an old recording studio with a great big grill, and I mean, it's almost as big as your face. That's what this microphone looks like. It's designed to have that vintage look. And so a lot of people actually do want to know what the quote-unquote microphone is. And now listeners of the Bruce Collins Show are in the loop.
Yeah, my device is a HAL 8999. It comes with a glowing red dot.
Yeah, I remember those guys. Yeah. They're controversial because they tend to pick fights with their operators.
That's right, yes, and mine sure does. Now, I understand lately you've been doing research on mystery booms. How did this come about? What stirred your interest in this topic?
That's a good question. I don't remember exactly when I became interested in the mystery booms, but I guess I could say that, if you're interested in strange phenomena, one of the long-standing catch-all terms for this kind of phenomena, as your listeners will probably remember, although it's a rather obscure term, is Forteana, or to be an advocate of the study of strange phenomena that seems to, according to many, smack in the face of the science establishment. You are a Fortean. Fortean, of course, being derived from the name of Charles Hoy Fort, who authored, I think in 1928, it was when Book of the Damned was first published. An interesting and at times awkwardly written book that it did just that. It specialized in sourcing information from science articles, from popular periodicals, newspapers, that cited things which seemed to be beyond the scope of modern science. We see what would well be classified, I think, Fortean phenomena around us all the time. Recently in the news in Australia, there have been reports of spiders raining. And there are no doubt natural explanations for these kind of things, but it's generally weird stuff that kind of escapes from the everyday. Now, after Fort came along, and it's funny, I wrote an article a few years ago talking about Fortean phenomena, and I remember a woman tried to correct me and said, you misspelled 14. It's F-O-R. See, they just don't know what that even means. And so, and I'll say that, often you won't find Fortean in a lot of dictionaries and encyclopedias. But a few years later, there was an American physicist who came along and an advocate of the Fortean philosophy, I suppose. And that was William R. Corliss. And although his background was in physics, he collected for about 3 decades a lot of data, again, or rather more precisely citing sources primarily from science journals. Occasionally periodicals were referenced as well, as long as it was something that was a reliable source. Corliss, unlike Fort, who would often talk about crazy things like airships and really the predecessors to modern UFO phenomena, Corliss was much more into the natural phenomena, strange sounds that would emanate from the Earth, nocturnal luminous emissions, or, what some might call UFOs, but which are more likely to be akin to ball lightning and things like that. Natural phenomena that we don't fully understand. I got to tell you, Bruce, as my interest in strange phenomena progresses, yes, I've become, as I say at my website, a self-proclaimed but not a self-righteous skeptic. In that Pyrrhonist philosophy, in that sense that you can be skeptical without having to be a jerk to people. You can be skeptical and also withhold judgment and not have to supply some sort of a catch-all and often an even more credulous solution in the name of popular skepticism, like we do see often. And there's some good skeptics out there, don't get me wrong. I identify a lot of the time with their philosophy. They may not identify with me in the same way. So I realize it didn't go both ways, but I think that it's pairing that kind of critical thinking and that attitude toward natural phenomena and my general trend over time toward interest in those things which are kind of on the brink of scientific understanding and a little bit further from the realm of the woo-woo, as it were, they really have captured my interest. So I guess rather than Fortean, you might call me Corlissian. And Corliss in his writing was one who spent a lot of time documenting anomalous sounds in nature. So going back to around the turn of the winter of 2013 into 2014, there were a lot of reports of strange noises. And geologists in the audience, of course, will say, and those are called cryoseism. That's right, frost quakes. We have a name for that. Well, it may not be as simple as that. As a matter of fact, going back to ancient times, and especially spanning the last several hundred years here in North America, there are a lot of reports of different kinds of strange noises that are heard all over the place. As a matter of fact, we could look right here in North Carolina on the Outer Banks. There are what have often been referred to as Seneca guns, these strange booms that have been for a long time reported on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. That name, Seneca guns, actually is kind of derived more from something that's actually been reported for, again, centuries around Lake Seneca in New York's Catskill Mountains. That actual phenomena was probably referenced in literary works, including Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle. James Fenimore Cooper's The Lake Gun is a pretty obvious reference to that just as well. But it's not just in parts of North America, Bruce. We've got in Greenland French explorers near Scoresby Sound who in the 1930s, and actually a previous expedition had cited a similar phenomena. They described a deep foghorn-like boom that they called the Tonder Doveby. There's the Bay of Bengal that has what are known as bandsaw guns. There are booms that are reported in Japan called yan. In Shikoku and other regions, the Italians have a name for this, a thunderous phenomena that they, of course, describe. Also in Belgian traditions, there are what are known as mist poofers, which translates roughly to mean fog belches. As I dug into the literature, I found that reports of mystery booms and varieties of other different kinds of similar anomalous sounds in nature have been reported for a long time and all over the world. And there seems to have been a lot of them continuing throughout the last few winters, and not just in the winters. As a matter of fact, as recently as the last few days, there have been a number of headlines talking about a strange noise that's been reported in British Columbia. Now, I think I have a pretty good idea what the explanation for that is, but, of course, then again, that doesn't necessarily explain the fact that similar noises are reported in a lot of localities around the world. And so I try to be open-minded and not put forward this catch-all, we can explain all of these. I have a friend in the skeptic community who has tried to do just that, and frankly, in the absence of explaining a number of other instances where similar phenomena seem to not meet the criteria for explanation that a single standalone case may, warrant. So, that's kind of where we are with things. I'm trying to look at things scientifically and not in a sensational way, but I've decided to put together a website for this called mysterybooms.com, and that brings us up to the present.
Speaking of in a sensational way, a lot of things now that are unexplainable go into the terminology of end of the world. Mystery booms, it's the end of the world, or mystery booms, you might have some people in the religious community saying mystery booms, it's signs in the heavens or something like that. So we have that sort of hysteria, if you will, not trying to offend anyone, but we have that mindset, many people nowadays. Back then when these things were occurring, how did they try to connect them to anything?
That's a good question. And actually, I'm really glad you bring that up. Because, in fact, just today at the website, I did a piece titled Signs of End Times. Strange sky trumpets probably aren't that. Now, some may be wondering what a sky trumpet is. And this refers specifically to not a particular variety of phenomena. In fact, it's the exact same thing that I was previously discussing in relation to what's been reported in parts of British Columbia, parts of Europe, also in Australia, dating back to 2012, which are these strange kind of metallic screeching noises that appear to emanate from the sky, but in a lot of cases there's good evidence that suggests that industrial origins probably are underlying these noises. For instance, we have in British Columbia one of the more famous recent reports talking about this around the area of Terrace, British Columbia. City officials since 2013 have said that it's metal blades dragging against asphalt paving during grading operations that have been occurring. And people have said that's not grading, that's just that there's nothing about that sounds like grating. So some kid actually, apparently at about 8:10 local time, about a week and 3 days ago, was out in the forest and heard these noises, and he followed the sound and with his smartphone goes to the top of a hill and zooms in and films the grader driving across a parking lot making the noise. I mean, it's pretty obvious what's happening. Similar noises are reported in other locations, and they seem to not always be accompanied by industrial sources. And so it begs the question, and it's even caused NASA to utilize different terminology for strange noises that occur from time to time. Physicists have hypothesized that maybe electromagnetic background noise interacting with aurora could actually produce audible signals that humans can hear, which may account for these strange noises. But in the last couple of days, due in part, or thanks in part to a article that appeared in the Daily Mail that referred to them as being trumpet-like, slant began to appear, and a bunch of news sources carried this. WorldNet Daily featured an article, and in fact, the author was Joe Kovacs, and he wrote that mysterious unexplained sounds in the sky that some are likening to trumpet blasts are puzzling people all over the world, including in the United States. He likened it to the Apostle Paul describing the resurrection of dead believers in Jesus to occur at the last trumpet blast. There was a caller who called into the Glenn Beck radio program talking about this. And of course, Glenn Beck said, in response, I'm not so sure I think that these sounds are God, because if these are trumpets or anybody, an angel band playing them, they suck. So, but I think that Fox News linked to the WorldNet Daily article, and I have to say, that is pretty sensational and frankly kind of silly. Mm-hmm. And so what we see on both sides is that people kind of and again, I'm like you, I don't want to offend anybody, but let's just be honest about what we're talking about here. People hear these strange noises. In many cases, there's probably a very prosaic explanation, as was indicated around Terrace, British Columbia. I am careful not to leap to judgment that that's the case in all instances where these noises are recorded. And I wouldn't even be beyond saying that some of the videos appearing online aren't actually borrowing audio from previously uploaded videos and overdubbing them to create the appearance of there being more than a phenomena than there actually may be. That in itself is speculation, but I want to be clear on it and at least offer that as an opinion. But, again, we see these websites saying, yep, the horns of angels, the end times are near. And that's going to scare a lot of people. And that's why I have a problem with people offering that as an explanation. By the same token, on the hardened skeptic side of things, they say there's absolutely nothing. These are trains. When in fact, the train explanation, i.e. the metal brakes engaged, which causes this loud squeaking noise as a train is coming to a halt along in a train yard, that, again, is not consistent with the official explanations given by city officials in locations like Terrace, British Columbia, nor is that necessarily something that has occurred in conjunction with the sounds where they appear elsewhere in the world. So I'm actually open in some cases to the possibility that there is indeed, as NASA and some physicists have explained, electromagnetic background noise that may constitute some of these noises. We can't prove that. That in itself is also conjecture, but at least I think it's possible. And we need to be careful not to leap to some ridiculous conclusion, especially one that's going to scare the hell out of everybody.
So there's no nexus point of these booms. Some of them are coming from, well, we really don't know where they're coming from, right?
Well, there are some locations, Bruce, where people are reporting them a little more than in other locations. There were a number of reports of these things around the Bay Area, in California.
Well, my ears are bad. That's why I didn't hear them.
Yeah, right. Well, what's interesting about this is that, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but in some of the cases, like for instance, you hear about these booms, and again, there was a skeptical blogger who was I consider a friend that I've communicated with her a lot over the years, Sharon Hill. She documented a lot of these mystery booms throughout the winter months, and of course, every instance, pretty much, she was saying, wow, this has been a great winter for cryoseisms. And when the booms started occurring in the Bay Area, around February, early March, and whatnot, people were still saying cryoseisms. Now, what that is essentially the scientific term for a geological phenomenon. Of course, Sharon Hill, by the way, I should point out, also has a background in geology, and it's a term that more commonly refers to what are called frost quakes, when usually before the first deep freeze of the wintertime, and that usually is because without a snow covering the surface of the ground, which actually helps form a layer of insulation, before that first deep freeze, if a lot of heavy rain occurs and the ground becomes saturated, and then subsequent to that is a quick, sudden freeze where temperatures drop well below freezing at night, what can happen is explosive at times pressure can build up underground as the ground freezes, and hence it can cause these cracks and loud pops that a lot of people report. And I'm convinced that in the winter months, that's probably why there are a greater number of reports of mystery booms, because a lot of these things are probably frost quakes. But the things that were happening over the last couple of months in the Bay Area, I went to the Weather Underground website, wonderground. I think it's .com, maybe .org. But the Weather Underground, great website that allows you to access temperature data, spanning several years back, according to data and temperature data that's been kept by usually the nearest airport in the region. The temperatures weren't even getting anywhere near freezing, and yet people were still reporting these mystery booms around the area of San Francisco. And interestingly, there were some reports that accompanied these booms that involved flashes of light seen in the sky. Okay. Also, on the northeast coast, between the winter of 1977 and into 1978, which went well into the warm weather months just as well, there were an absolute rash of boom reports. A similar wave of booms along the Northeast occurred in the 1990s. And then, of course, yes, since 2013, we've seen probably a greater incidence of mystery boom reports along the Northeast coast again. And so this is another one of these hot spots. The Federation of American Scientists, back in the 70s, incidents had determined that in likelihood what was being reported was sonic booms from the from a particular kind of a commercial aircraft that was known as the Concorde jet. It was supposed to fly out over the ocean so that the sonic booms that it produced when it reached supersonic speed, it was supposed to fly out over the ocean so that it would not disturb people as a result of the inevitable sonic booms. But what was suspected in those cases, actually people were still hearing the booms as a result of the fact that anomalous configurations in the jet stream were carrying those sounds further inland, and that on extremely warm days, these particular jet, because of the fact that fuel expands in the jet's engine on a hot day and thus fuel efficiency is somewhat diminished, that they would shortcut over areas like Nova Scotia, further contributing to the fact that the booms were heard over land. That research, again, was largely carried out by Jeremy Stone, who was at the time the president of the Federation of American Scientists. He was pretty convinced that what we were experiencing in these boom hotspots along the Northeast were sonic booms from the Concorde aircraft. But what's interesting is that there was a Dr. William Don. He was a meteorologist, and I think he kind of differed on that point because of the number of nighttime booms that he said were accompanied by, especially when pilots saw I should say that accompanying reports of booms on ground level, pilots would often at the same time report seeing strange flashes of sky, of light in the night sky. Some of the ground level reports of the booms also were accompanied by flashes too, which was very much like what was reported in the last couple of months over the Bay Area. And what William Don's interpretation was that rather than being sonic booms from aircraft, in likelihood, he said that there were upper atmosphere storms that sometimes aren't even detectable from ground level. They can occur so high up, but pilots, of course, are going to see the flashes, and at night, the flash might be bright enough that the lightning that occurs in these upper atmosphere storms, and yes, can cause a boom similar to thunder, might be reported by people. And so I think that is a separate explanation. But what we start to see, Bruce, is that, yeah, there are areas that become kind of epicenters, and whether that be the fact that they're a geological phenomena or that there are aircraft operating in those areas. The Concorde, of course, is no longer in service, so it'd be difficult to, use that as an excuse for the sonic booms, although we can't rule out military aircraft. Meteorological phenomena. There are any number of different approaches that we can apply in terms of trying to explain this, and people in different disciplines often gravitate toward one or the other. And so in fairness, when someone with a background in geology like Sharon Hill becomes focused on frost quakes and cryoseisms, well, that's natural because that's her area of expertise. And again, a meteorologist is going to say upper atmospheric storms. Jeremy Stone, after talking with a bunch of people about sonic booms and how they're produced, sure, he's going to gravitate toward the idea that this was the Concorde aircraft. But in likelihood, it's probably a combination of all the varieties of phenomena and certain locations that are more conducive to probably more than one of those at a time, especially throughout the winter months, that cause people to hear these booms all over the place. But there are a lot of different interpretations, and really there are even more than what we've just covered now.
I imagine there are people who believe in climate change that maybe think that this directly or indirectly creates mystery booms. Would that be right?
I think that it's interesting because right now, again, I've been referred to by people and gotten emails, especially from people, my listeners in Europe. They'll say, Mikey, you're a smart guy. You try to apply a lot of science to what you talk about. I do not respect the fact, however, that you are a climate denier. And I thought to myself, when one person emailed me about this, I thought, who said I was a climate denier? What I have talked about in the past is what more than 26 studies cite as being climate change hiatus. I think that's the general term for this. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of different reasons that have been cited as to why there appear to be trends that are kind of, if you don't want to call it a hiatus, slowing trends where we're seeing a diminished effect of climate change in recent years. One has been the hole in the ozone. Over the South Pole. I think there also the fact that ocean water in the Atlantic seems to be absorbing heat and offsetting some of these temperature trends around the country. There are a lot of different ideas as to what may be contributing to climate change hiatus. So some people link solar cycles and things like that. But then again, in the past, there have also been serious scientific studies that link flu outbreaks to solar activity, as strange as that may sound. I don't think that you can rule out all of these things, but you do need to remember, of course, if you're going to be scientific about things, that causation does not necessarily mean, or rather correlation does not necessarily mean, causality. I think that, just because we see an apparent correlation, that doesn't mean that there's a cause and effect that really is scientific. With regard to climate change as it relates to mystery sounds, what I always try to tell people is that we certainly see a lot of people who, I think, in fairness, while there is science that suggests that there may be anthropogenic changes occurring with regard to climate, and I think there's obviously some good science that supports this, as well as some good science that supports the idea that some of it is being extremely hyped, and that a lot of the politicization of that science leads to unnecessary alarmist presentation of the science. I really think that there is an awful lot of that these days, which is why I try to underscore, let's be pleasant to one another, let's not critique and attack, and let's by all means try not to be super sensational with our discussion about these kind of things, as many people tend to be. But when I started seeing, of course, these mystery craters and holes in Siberia, there have been a number of these. People are saying, "Yep, it's climate change." And sure enough, within just a reasonable amount of time after these boom reports start showing up, people start saying, "Could be climate change," and maybe it could be. But I decided to look and see if there were a scientific statement anywhere available about this. And the U.S. Geological Survey actually has a fact page that they've put up about what they describe as, or label as, earthquake booms, Seneca guns, and other sounds, in which they cite global warming is not likely to be a factor that influences strange booms or these other anomalous sounds around the world. They say the articles that suggest global warming don't offer any explanation of how a gradual warming of the atmosphere would produce something as sudden as a loud boom. Also, global warming would affect the whole globe, where Seneca guns, again to use a colloquial term, have only been reported from a few areas. That from the USGS website. So, in my opinion, it seems to me that it's unlikely that climate change is directly linked with any of the mystery booms. But, of course, there are going to be alarmists out there who are going to say that anything that seems to be potentially dangerous or scary is a result of what we're doing to our planet. Again, if that sounds to somebody like I'm trying to deny climate change, and I certainly won't say global warming, because I think that a more appropriate term is climate change. If that sounds like I'm being dismissive to somebody, please understand that I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm trying not to be an alarmist. And yes, there is an overtly politicized alarmist attitude among many people who will get behind this as an intellectual kind of a just a cause that they have to take up. This idea that we've got to change our ways or we are doomed, which is in a lot of ways, Bruce, to me, similar to the idea of, strange noises being equated with trumpets blowing at the end of time.
Right.
You see it on both sides of the scope, is what I'm saying.
That's right. And actually, we have an angry caller right now. Line 1, Mr. Gore, you're on the air.
Yes, exactly. I'll tell Mr. Gore to please turn off all the lights upstairs in your home while you're not using them, because, you can't just be the exception to the rule. It may be an inconvenient truth, but I remember hearing the story about a few years ago. He has a home in Tennessee, and the electricity consumption in his home is just off the chart. Gore's done a lot for advocacy, with regard to climate change, but I think that, again, if you really look at this, which few people tend to do, Bruce, from the economic standpoint, exactly. I always get suspicious when I see politicians getting behind a cause like this, and more often than not, you'll often find that they tend to present things in such a way that they're also going to benefit from. I think that Gore's no exception to that when it comes to his advocacy of, climate change awareness.
It's been very lucrative. Now, here's an interesting thought. Are there any mystery boom flaps? Which I would think there would be. But then another thought of going in that direction. Are there any reoccurring cyclical mystery booms, like a town somewhere, every 50 years we hear this noise? What about something like that?
That's interesting. I've dug a good bit into the history behind mystery booms. And, Dr. Gordon MacDonald was an American geophysicist. He was a former charter member of the President's Three-Man Council on Environmental Quality. And he began digging into the history of these reports, and it turned out that there actually had been a lot of reports of booms, which interestingly happened before the Great San Francisco earthquake. I believe it was in 1906.
Wow.
There have been a lot of reports of earthquakes and things that occurred in Charleston, South Carolina. One notable case in 1883, booms were reported before that one. Digging into the literature a little further, I've also found that there was a similar report of an earthquake around that time in Turkey, where booms were reported prior to that. But as far as there being a situation where, every 100 years we hear a boom, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think that the closest, what we might call a boom flap or a wave, the closest I think that we come to something along those lines, occurred between, I shouldn't say occurred between 1977 and 1978. That was the first, what I think the media began to seriously report as being a wave of mystery booms that occurred over the northeastern United States, specifically around southern New Jersey. I found that so interesting because, again, within the last few months, southern New Jersey yet again is an epicenter of these kind of reports. People report booms that are accompanied by shaking, and yet seismologists don't register any actual seismic activity that seems to indicate that there was an earthquake or anything along those lines. And so there are a lot of questions about how these things can seem to be so loud and impressive and yet so localized that seismologists can't account for any kind of earthquake activity.
Wow.
So there are a lot of reports, though. Again, there was a huge wave of these things in 1978 and 79, or 77 and 78, I'm sorry, which was what got Jeremy Stone involved with at the time he was president of the Federation of American Scientists. I think actually Carl Sagan had been one of the guys who had said, Jeremy, you better look into this. We need an explanation. Yet again, people were saying, oh, hell, the sky's falling, the world's going to end. Mm-hmm. And so he looked into this, and I've said, his determination was sonic booms. Many, especially those in different branches of science, have disputed that. But again, in the 1990s, there was a similar wave of reports of mystery booms. And then, of course, there was also this mystery boom wave that's spanned the last few years, I'd say, at least going back to 2013, but maybe even earlier. There are some that go back prior to that. The Northeast is certainly kind of an epicenter as far as North America goes. But again, as we discussed at the outset, the fact that there are colloquial names in different languages for different cultures in different parts of the world seems to express that there is a commonality. And another place, actually, really where there seems to be just an ongoing, story of mystery sounds that are likened to booms is, yet again, the North Carolina Outer Banks, which might, according to some, fall into the Carolina region, the East Coast, waves, and it's something that probably a lot of people are going to say, yep, if that was on the East Coast, these are going to be sonic booms. Well, what's interesting is that well before there were supersonic aircraft, there were reports of the mystery booms, like what happens in the Catskills, the Seneca guns, as they're known in New York. That name is applied to what happens on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. But what I suspect, Bruce, is that there's very different phenomena occurring in both locations. I couldn't account for maybe what the Seneca guns of New York are. But there is a known geophysical phenomena, which is called booming sands, which, in theory, what is probably happening with regard to booming sands is that there are fine, rounded grains of sand that are capable of, for whatever reason, over distance, maybe it could be wind. It's not fully understood, but it's just noted that in locations where sand is of particular shape and consistency, that over distance, booming noises tend to propagate. And, of course, with the large sand dunes that run along the North Carolina coast, there has, for hundreds of years, been a phenomena, these booms of the Outer Banks that have been reported.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know you were talking about colloquial names that different groups, different people all around the world give these mystery booms. I know in Italy they're known as bada booms. So that's now.
I like it.
Anyway, so what's more predominant of these three choices? And there may be other choices to make within that, but are these mystery booms heard in large groups? Are they heard in solo situations? Or are they heard in solo situations where the person is surrounded by a group and the rest of the group does not hear the boom?
That's a good question. There are often reports. There was one actually that happened maybe 20 minutes from where I'm located, outside of Asheville, North Carolina, back just a couple of months ago. A friend of mine, I was explaining the fact that I said, I'm really interested in this. And in the past, Bruce, I've written books and things like that. And this was not what caused me to build a website. But before we get into these group reports, because I'm going to tell you a pretty decent one that occurred nearby, I have, as a researcher, been accused in the past of just trying to sell books to people and just, you're just trying to sell books. If you're going to just make money off of people, at least be upfront about it. I think a writer and a researcher has a right to be able to profit from what they do. I could have easily written an ebook and have been promoting a book. I want people to understand that in the name of trying to reduce this sensationalism and these scare tactics that people have been offering, like the Daily Mail, like WorldNet Daily and Fox News, and by the way, I'm not just citing conservative news sources. I don't think the Daily Mail would fall under that. I'm talking about any news source that would bring attention to this in a way that seems to indicate the end of the world or climate change is killing us. The booms don't appear to be related to either of those phenomena. And so this website is freely available to the public, mysterybooms.com. On the About page, it talks about me. My name's on there. So before there's anybody who comes along criticizing this, I want to just point out I've made this freely available to people because I think it's important to get this information out. Now, that said, I was talking to a friend of mine about this website and underscoring the philosophy behind why I'm doing it, just as I did for you. And he said, Micah, I heard one of those things, which is like 20 minutes from my house. And I said, do tell. And he says, what happened was I heard this incredible boom. He said, I thought that what had happened was that a transformer had blown or something like that, but it was much louder. The windows kind of shook. He said I halfway thought that there was, that there might be a quarry nearby or something, or that there was an actual explosion. That's how loud this was. And he said that he noticed on social media a few minutes later that a friend of his had posted and said, did anybody else hear the ear-splitting boom over the Mills River area of North Carolina, just outside of Asheville, and actually the new home of the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company's wonderful new facilities that my friends at Sierra Nevada have taken me on a tour of. So I couldn't tell you if it was a beer factory boom, but I do know that in that area that there was one of these loud booms reported, and many people were taking to social media and reporting it. In a lot of these boom cases, you'll see that there's a boom heard, and the news articles that cite the sources are going directly to community groups on Facebook, if they're open groups to the public, and they're sourcing their information from what people are saying on Facebook, what they're saying on Twitter. Earlier this year, it was kind of humorous because, and I've got a page up at Mystery Booms. If you head to the website, and you'll see possible causes, and a drop-down occurs with a lot of different ideas. I encourage people to click on exploding head syndrome in the bottom of the drop-down column, because it seemed to me that without actually saying this was an explanation, there were a lot of articles that seemed to kind of try and, suggest that this exploding head phenomena, which is a neurological phenomenon where you wake up or just before you're going to bed, you perceive the sound of what is similar to a thud or a bunch of books hitting the floor. It is indeed a sound that occurs in your head. I think that 5 in 10 or more people, especially in their 20s and 30s, may tend to experience this. I've experienced it. And then one morning I actually woke up to the sound of a book falling off a shelf, and it was actually a book falling off a shelf, so no exploding head, fortunately. But to try and say that it's a neurological, a little-known psychological phenomenon is actually how the website cited it. It seems so silly because, to me, it was clear, and it is clear from the various instances where this is reported, that numerous people hear these things. They often take to social media, and you'll find that when a boom occurs, scads of reports emanate from that area where it was heard. Numerous people report hearing it.
If groups of people hear these and either they're processing something a certain way collectively or they're actually hearing a boom, I would assume they're hearing a boom, but who knows? Are also the animals surrounding them? Is there any anecdotal evidence that other species also hear these noises?
Or maybe we should say hear them and are affected by them.
Right.
Yeah. There was a report and a rather interesting one that we put up, at the Mystery Boom site I've got. Rather than a typical, blog type site, this site is oriented with a lot of pages that offer everything from, a general explanation, a history. There is a recent history, which is labeled recent reports. And then I've got a bunch of resources and other kind of things, even a page where people can submit a report of a boom. But the In the News page actually is a live updated blog section for the site. And just a couple of weeks ago, there was an article I put up that was talking about a rather interesting incident that occurred in or around the area known as Wookiee Hole. Which is actually an area with an unusual name in the British countryside. This the Wookiee Hole is named so for a cave, a karstic cave nearby, that is known as the Wookiee Hole Caverns. Wookiee, of course, is interesting because for a number of reasons. Of course, a Wookiee in the Star Wars universe, we know what that is. Mm-hmm. A Wookiee hole, what's believed is that the Wookiee term actually may be derived from an earlier Celtic word, which essentially meant cave. So if you've got Wookiee Hole Caverns, you're actually essentially talking about cave. The Wookiee Hole Caverns actually have a legend about a witch associated with them, and they are of archaeological significance. There were 2 episodes of Doctor Who that were filmed there, so they've been used in different television and film productions over the years. And the town of Wookiee, there near the Wookiee Hole Caverns, this famous landmark, was the location where one of these booms was reported recently. So I was digging into the history of the town to see if any way there was anything about the caves that could possibly in any way be linked to this boom. Didn't seem to be the case. And in fact, contrary to the idea that this was some sort of geological phenomena, the boom coincided with 2 rather interesting facets that we reported. I mean, I'd almost say that these were kind of strange. One was that when the boom occurred, it was extremely loud, and that some area residents ran to their windows and claimed that they saw smoke over a field, which initially I thought, okay, maybe that's a firework or something like that. Then there was reports of animal disturbance in the area. Specifically, one observer had said that they saw a dog that seemed extremely concerned and was running, just in a breakneck pace, like they're trying to get away from the general area from where the boom had occurred. In similar fashion, there were reports about the mystery booms on the Outer Banks from earlier this year that seemed to coincide with a large school of fish that washed up dead along the East Coast. Now, again, I want to draw attention to the point that I made earlier, which is a tenet of good science, and I think that needs to be emphasized here. What may be perceived as a correlation does not necessarily mean that there is a causal relationship. So when we hear about booms on the Outer Banks, that doesn't necessarily mean it's causing fish to die. It seemed more likely, in the case of the Wookiee explosion from a few weeks ago, that the boom caused the fright that was observed with the strange behavior that the dog exhibited. And so, yeah, there are a few instances, and I've tried to keep an eye peeled for that. But when it comes to animal disturbance in relation to these mystery noises, another interesting facet is that, digging deeper into the scientific literature, I mentioned William R. Corliss earlier. In his science notebooks and the collected works that he published over the years, which you can find out more about at science-frontiers.com, great website. I highly recommend his books and the Science Source Book Project publications that were put out over the years. Just chock full of cool stuff. But in them, he's discussed a lot of different anomalous sounds in nature, and so I've got a page up at the site that's actually titled Anomalous Sounds in Nature that doesn't have to do so much with mystery booms, but other kinds of strange noises. And among them, in a lot of instances, people who have been at sea have heard strange musical noises that seem to come from the water itself, and it's believed that certain species of fish are actually behind these noises. And so, interestingly, there's a strange bit of a parallel between the schools of fish and the mystery noises in the sense that, yes, some schools of fish actually produce noises.
Do you know if there's any government-sponsored groups that are doing research on this phenomenon?
You might say that in the sense, not independent groups that are specifically involved with this. I'd mentioned that Jeremy Stone did what appeared to be a private investigation into mystery booms back in the late 1970s. That would have fallen under the work carried out by the Federation of American Scientists, but that really, I think, was more Jeremy Stone trying to admirably. I think a lot of people, differ with him on the idea of the sonic boom explanation, but what Jeremy Stone was trying to do was sort of similar to my scope of interest in this, which was to kind of remove the overt sensationalism that was appearing in the media and to try and offer a scientific explanation. The problem I see with a lot of scientific explanations, though, is that people latch onto one. Here it is. Sonic booms. Here it is. Frost quakes. Here it is. Anomalous propagation of God knows what in the upper atmosphere. HAARP, Steve Quayle listeners, who knows? But what ends up happening, though, is that people latch on to a single explanation. What we have to do is we have to be open-minded enough to consider that probably there are a lot of things that can cause different varieties of boom-like audible phenomena. But I don't think that I can say that there is with certainty one single source, or one single group that is looking into this. If I were a millionaire, Bruce, I would put together my Avengers, and I would have a team, and if I ever am so lucky as to get truly independently wealthy, I will do this one day. I let there be no joke, and may your listeners be the first to hear it. I will absolutely put together an independent Bob Bigelow style, but with a lot more transparency, group that investigates anomalous phenomena in nature in this same non-sensational way. And just to take a step back for a moment, a lot of people know me, I think, as a researcher, as being someone who's involved in UFOs. There is that stigma attached to UFOs. Oh, you mean alien spacecraft? No. As a matter of fact, for years I have not been of the mind that UFOs are necessarily any kind of reliable evidence of ETs. And by expressing interest in UFOs, advocacy of the study of that subject, and skepticism toward the ET hypothesis, I've maintained what I think is a fundamentally skeptical attitude about that. I'm applying the same line of logic to all phenomena without disclosing it or excluding it from the discussion like a lot in the modern skeptical atheist community would do. And I realize that, if ever I, in presenting this sort of stuff, attract enough attention, that the individuals who associate themselves, philosophically with the modern skeptic atheist movement, they will, not all of them. I have friends in the movement, but I don't consider myself a part of it. Then again, neither does P.Z. Myers anymore. But there are a lot of people, I'm sure, who will ridicule and attack me. That's fine. But again, I say and I maintain that there are people on both sides, the quote-unquote skeptics and the quote-unquote believers, who are just as equally beholden to belief-oriented behavior and values and philosophy. And I think that really you cannot exclude, if you're going to truly be scientific, there's just a more rational and skeptical way to go about studying what appear to be genuine anomalies, whether they be mystery booms, unidentified flying objects, or anything else. So yeah, if I ever were to become wealthy enough, then you'd have it might not be government sponsored at that point, but yeah, you'd have your boom study group. But we'd also look at anomalous lights. We'd look at UFO phenomena. I would love to have a group of people where we could have the proper funding and the proper wherewithal to seriously, scientifically, and soberly look at phenomena. That would just be the dream gig, wouldn't it? So I'll call you if that happens, okay?
Excellent. Because I was going to say, speaking scientifically and not sensationalistic, I would have to say that these mystery booms are probably the collective sounds of trees falling in the forest that nobody else hears.
There you go. Yes, we have ignored the fact that the sound occurs.
It's building. It's building.
The trees want to be heard. Damn it!
Right. Now, speaking of HAARP, why has this fallen out of favor with conspiracy buffs? Is that just my imagination, or everybody seems to have dropped that like a bad habit?
Yeah, right. HAARP is an interesting subject, Bruce. I got an email from one of my listeners the other day, and actually she had said, have you ever considered whether the High Altitude Auroral Research Project and similar projects that may be being carried out elsewhere in the world might underlie some of these reports of booms? Now, maybe that's not as crazy and conspiratorial as it sounds, and I'll tell you why. First, I think the HAARP program, if I remember correctly, I think shut down. I think it was a joint project with the University of Alaska, and I think that the facility is actually, or has been, for sale. I don't know if somebody's purchased it yet, but I think that HAARP is defunct at present. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other studies going on, and I'm going to tell you right now, the political climate, especially in the East, seems to be becoming rather intense, and so there has indeed been speculation, and I've got friends who have worked with everything from the infrasound network over the years and other organizations who have actually suggested to me. I've got a lot of friends in the science community, and especially a lot of retirees who've worked on things over the years who can't necessarily put their name behind what they tell me, but we certainly they don't give me secrets. They don't give me black ops operations and stuff like that. They're just as interested, and they have just as many questions as I do. But from a background in government, they're able to lend a lot of insight. People who've been in the space program, people who are presently in the space program, people who, have worked with the infrasound network, people who have worked as biologists, zoologists, meteorologists, physicists, cell microbiologists. Got a lot of friends in the science community. I'm very thankful for that. It shows that while they realize that it would be academic suicide to put their name behind this stuff, they believe enough in the possibility of a phenomena, despite their natural skepticism as members of the academic and science community, that they come to me and talk about this, knowing that, Mike has already put his name behind it, so let him risk his reputation. But a friend of mine who had worked formerly with the infrasound network had suggested over-the-horizon technologies, the likes, Cold War era type stuff that Russia might be developing. And especially with the waves of reports that were not only reported over the winter months this past year, over the northeastern United States, but also over parts of London and the UK. And there were recordings made of these strange booms that were recorded over the UK. And so, yes, some people have suggested that to me. And again, I don't think that it's fair for me to say that because it's been suggested to me that is a credible, possible explanation for the boom reports, but I don't think that it's necessarily lunatic fringe to suggest that there may be scientific exploration, new kinds of applications that involve, again, high-altitude auroral research, the likes of which HAARP was engaged in, over the horizon or OTH technologies. There was a funny UFO book that the folks at Open Minds gave me when I went and visited their offices in March of 2013. It was a book by Wendell Stevens. And in the back, there was an appendix that was all about skyquakes in relation to reports of UFOs, which, again, is not something that sounds crazy to me, especially considering that one of the preeminent theories about the cause of mystery booms is sonic booms that are created by supersonic aircraft, probably military aircraft. So it seems very likely that UFO, again, unidentified flying objects, maybe military craft or any number of other possible explanations, whatever they may be, these UFOs probably accompany from time to time sonic booms, i.e. skyquakes, i.e. mystery boom.
If the Russians are behind these shenanigans, I'll call up my source, Nikolai Volkov.
Oh, cool. We'll tell him I said hi.
Yeah. And I'm not an author, but I do have an appendix. Now,
mine hasn't been removed either.
Here's another, we can bring it back around to the beginning of our talk, because this morning at work, I was shuffling through the hallway, and this guy was walking in the other direction. He said, "Hey, why do you have that dirty coffee cup?" And I said, "This is not a coffee cup. It's for teaing." Now, before you go, Micah, talk about these websites where you're delving into the mystery booms. Where can people find these websites again, and what kind of information can they find on these websites?
Yes, as we've mentioned a few times, there is the Mystery Booms website, which is just mysterybooms.com. But it's not the only site that I've put up about this, because there was enough interest back in the winter months I saw in the frostquake phenomena that I actually built a separate site, which is, again, it's not as regularly updated, but it links to the Mystery Boom site, and it's again probably an even more serious and sober presentation than the Mystery Boom site, and that's frostquake.org.
We've been speaking with the most riveting voice in radio, using his patented microphone, the mouth of the South, Micah Hanks. You can find out more information about Micah at micahhanks.com, and you can visit him at gralienreport.com. Micah Hanks, thank you once again for joining us this week.
Bruce Collins, it's always my pleasure. Hope to have you, or actually hope to be back on at some point. It's always good to talk with you, man.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Bruce Collins Show, where you can find us every Friday night at midnight here at WWPR 1490 AM. Remember, God loves you. We do too. Don't give up.